I was diagnosed with fibromyalgia when I was really young. I usually just say I was 7 when I tell this story, but I genuinely don't know how old I was because I was that young. I do still remember parts of that day, like how the doctor had me do certain flexibility tests and how those tests made him think I possibly had Ehlers-Danlos. But because I was so young, he felt it was safer to just go with fibromyalgia and then do more testing when I got older. If you don't know, fibromyalgia is usually diagnosed in middle-aged women. I was only maybe in 2nd grade at the latest when I got my diagnosis. It's usually diagnosed by ruling out other conditions, whereas my diagnosis was primarily just because I was so young that they didn't want to put me through all the tests for everything else. I wasn't necessarily medicated to my knowledge until my teens, once again because I was so young, so a lot of my care was just heating pad and over-the-counter pain meds that were for kids. The pain on top of the horrible insomnia I had made it to where I missed a lot of school. In 5th grade, the best accommodation to this was to go into online school. I stayed in online school off and on until I graduated in high school in 2019. I should note that over that stretch of time, I had been seen by new doctors off and on who revalidated the diagnosis. I have an older video on this channel talking about when my lung collapsed in 2017, which I will probably remake eventually. And that collapse is when I finally got some tests done to rule out other possibilities. I don't have Marfan syndrome despite having some of the traits and having it in the family. The Ehlers-Danlos test came back negative, but it's important to note with the Ehlers-Danlos test that the genetic testing for it only tests for classic EDS, while hypermobile EDS has to be diagnosed through a physical exam. In recent years, I've been given the generalized hypermobility spectrum disorder diagnosis, which is treated similarly to hypermobile Ehlers-Danlos. I just tell people, usually, just real quickly, like, I have Ehlers-Danlos, kind of. Because I feel like they're more likely to understand what Ehlers-Danlos is than having to explain what hypermobility is. I also have rheumatoid arthritis, so, fuck my joints specifically. I couldn't find a good place in the script to put this part, but I thought it was important to, like, hammer in how integrated into my life my chronic pain was and how I never experienced what it was like to have an able body. It took me until much later in life, I'm talking like post-high school, this was in the last 5-ish years, to realize that the agonizing growing pains I felt when I was a kid were not common. I, for some reason, I don't remember now, thought about the nights I'd wake up in so much pain that my mom would have to come and massage my joints, and I had asked my friends, like, hey, what was it like, what did the growing pains for you feel like when you had growing pains? And when I explained my experience, they informed me no, that's not what growing pains felt like. Growing pains were mildly uncomfortable at their worst, while mine felt like my leg was being pulled off. I recorded this crochet project during a period of time where I was off my main pain management medication that I had been on for almost 10 years because of a miscommunication with the pharmacy that quite frankly was on them and not me. I called in the refill. They told me it would be ready on Tuesday. I never received a notification, and my mom never received a notification, but at the same time, my mom had had a surgery done that made her unable to drive, so I actually couldn't get there easily, because I can't drive yet. And I had asked her, I was like, hey, did you ever, because she gets the refill notifications as well. I was like, did you ever get the refill notification for my medication? She goes, no. And I go, okay, I'll just call it in again. And then I went like a week without it, and this was done without that. Not even a week, 2 weeks without it, because what ended up happening is like, oh, they needed a new prescription written out, but they wouldn't tell me that until I called them directly. This squid amigurumi pattern was one that I was well familiar with. I've made it several times, but I was just having an extremely off day, and the light-colored chenille and counting were not helping me, but I picked it up the next day, and it was just fine, and you'll see that here soon, where as you're seeing me restart it multiple times, frogging it multiple times in this beginning clip, whereas the next time I recorded it the next day, completely fine. I don't even think I frogged it once. I kind of thought, me struggling here fit for the topic of the video, so I just kept the failed attempts footage to talk over. I'm following a pattern that I'll have up on screen. If I had to guess what I kept messing up, it was probably like you have to do 3 single crochets in the corners, and maybe I was only doing 2, therefore messing up the count. And because the yarn is chenille, so it's textured, and it's very light colored, I just couldn't tell where the fuck up was. If you notice I'm wearing the same shirt in this first section as the last video with the bag, it's because I recorded the last video after I gave up here. Back to the topic of the video, being off my medication made me relearn what it felt like before I started it, and it was like amazing to realize just how awful I felt, considering that even on this medication I had bad days. I struggled to get to sleep and stay asleep, which was already a problem beforehand because of some problems with my sleep medication. Now it was just amplified. Sometimes I couldn't even get myself out of bed for hours after waking up because I was constantly tired and sluggish and had no energy to do anything. I thought, oh my god, I lived like this. Seriously? Every single day since I was in elementary school? It was one of those moments where, like, stories and jokes about how, like, oh, I feel so good, maybe I don't need the medication I take anymore. And then you stop taking them and realize that the reason you felt good was because you were taking that medication regularly. I was so thankful that I literally had nothing better to do than sit at my computer all day. Had I had to go to work on top of all of that, I wouldn't be nearly as productive. Which is to say that I wasn't being all that productive during this period of time either. In May, I graduated college, and about 2 weeks after the store that I have been working at since 2022 closed, and I have yet to get a job again. It is September 24th as I record this. I lost my job May 25th, I believe. So it's been 4 months. This isn't because I don't want to work. I have been applying to jobs. The problem is a combination of the job shortage in the US as a whole and the fact that employers don't want to hire disabled people. You may say, Soul, they can't deny you because you're disabled. That's illegal. And you're right, that's why they won't tell you that's why you weren't picked. I know every single time it's because I marked myself as disabled on the application. And I know that some people advocate for don't do that. Don't let them know that you are disabled until you are hired. I can't do that. That is doable for some people in their invisible illnesses. Mine directly impacts scheduling, so even if I don't mention it in the application, it would have to be brought up in the interview. When I was interviewed for the job I just lost, I directly asked about accommodations, and they were highly accommodating, and I was even hired on the spot despite mentioning my disability. There was a point system in the company, but it wasn't pushed too hard, and I only ever heard about it during appraisals when they'd mention, oh, you had less points this year than last year or whatever. It never impacted my ability to get a raise or anything. Fibromyalgia is a disability that is unpredictable, which means that there were times that I would only know I couldn't make it to work the morning of or the night before at best. Them not really caring about call-outs worked in my favor there. They really only cared if you didn't call and you ended up no-showing. I was also given permission to use my cane on days that were rough but not so bad I couldn't come in, or days where I couldn't call out because scheduling was bad. I wasn't allowed a chair at the registers, but no one minded if I snuck off into a dressing room to sit down for a few minutes or go to the bathroom and sit down for a few minutes. Thankfully for me, there was only a total of 2 times where I went to work and had to go home soon after due to not feeling good at all, and both times my coworkers and bosses were sympathetic. Both times I wasn't even aware it was a bad day until I had already gone in there, thus why I didn't call in. My job didn't necessarily have a high turnover rate, even though it was an entry-level job that hired high schoolers too. In fact, the people we would lose were usually people who just did not want to work. And I'm talking they would come in and find anything to do that wasn't work. It was a decent work environment, paid well, and was highly accommodating to anything that happened to people. I was allowed to go home early the day I learned my childhood cat had died, whereas I know a lot of other places probably would have made me keep working. In my last year of school and work, I actually could only work Saturdays and Sundays because of my school schedule being Monday through Friday. There was an older man who would only work Mondays, and I had one other coworker who had so many side jobs and health problems that during the last year, he only worked Fridays and would often have to call out of those shifts anyways. Of course, this puts strain on the co-workers, but for the most part, everyone was really chill, only really complaining in very special cases. I was extremely lucky to have a job that gave me so much leeway. I would still be with them while job hunting now if we literally didn't lose our building. In fact, we lost the whole mall, taking out all the other entry-level jobs that would have probably accommodated me too. But I will also say this leeway is what kept me employed and on good terms with my bosses, because I could be honest with them and they would understand when I couldn't come in so last minute. When I apply to a job, I genuinely expect to not get all the accommodations, but it's extremely important to me that I have short hours and/or access to sitting. If you're outside of the US and you're confused about that point and don't know, in the US, sitting on the job is seen as lazy. It's seen as if you aren't putting in your full effort. If you're not standing for 4+ hours straight, then you're not giving it your all. Unless you are in a wheelchair, most places will not accommodate sitting. I've applied to a handful of jobs that I know I can do with accommodations. I've only received one interview that I clearly did not get past because I'm here complaining. I should note that I'm being a bit picky. I don't really want to deal with customers anymore, for one. I'm still applying to jobs that require dealing with them, but simply no one's hiring, or they overlook my application because I need it to be known ahead of time that I'm disabled, and God forbid they have to let this disabled person sit down. And jobs like cashiering realistically can be done sitting. There's a grocery store in town that lets their employees sit. I haven't applied there for a few reasons, one being that they're not even hiring at the moment, and the other being I can't be around customers who are potentially hangry and grocery shopping at the same time. This is for the same reason I can't do food service jobs. I will end up like that episode of Malcolm in the Middle where he held his tongue and got a stomach ulcer because he wasn't bitching. I would not have a good standing if I had to directly work in such conditions. I worked at a department store for 3 years, and that was good enough for me. I only had to deal with customers who couldn't read normally. You want me to add buying food on top of that? Another job I didn't apply to for a few reasons, one of which being that they were trying to fill it before my store closed, and I was going to stay with the store until they closed. But I did reach out and ask about it, just in case, just on the off chance. The job was something that I actually am qualified for, as it was an art-related job, and I had actually just learned how to do this specific craft, last year. But they listed that it needed a lot of time on your feet, but my experience with this craft was that there was a lot of sit-down time as well, and there were times where I could work sitting down. So I just had to ask, I was like, how often would I be able to sit down in this job? And they told me, no, there was no accommodating sitting. Overall, I still wouldn't have had that chance because of the timing of the hiring, but I thought, seriously, an art-related job that I will literally have a degree for, and I can't even get on that because of my disability? And I get it, this specific craft is done much better when standing. It's a very physical craft, but the idea that standing even for parts of it that can be done sitting was required just... I went to a job fair that my college held at the beginning of this semester. I happened to be on campus for it and decided to take a look around. Usually the job fair is held in the Student Union Building's ballroom, and there's usually tons of employers there. This last one I went to was in the ballroom still, but it took up only about half of it, with half of the jobs available being campus jobs that were work-study only, meaning any member of the community that isn't enrolled can't apply. I could go on disability, of course, but disability in the US is highly restrictive and also extremely hard to get on. The most baffling restriction is the asset limit, where a single person receiving SSI is not allowed to have $2,000 in assets. This includes cash, money in the bank, and life insurance policies. This limit is only raised to $3,000 if you're married. These limits have not been raised since 1989. My problem is I would like to have more than 2K on standby for emergencies or even for travel. I would love to go on a trip to Japan one day. I can't do that if I'm on SSI because I can't have more than 2,000 saved up. You need more than 2,000 to travel to Japan for a week, as just the round trip ticket is almost 1,000. There are pushes to raise the limit to adjust for how much inflation there's been since 1989, to make the limit a much more reasonable $10,000 for single and $20,000 for married, but our current legislation provides zero hope for that, as they instead work to remove even significant cancer research from the country. The average supporter of this legislation would argue that they don't want their tax dollars going to people who cheat the system to get onto disability without even trying to look up how hard it is to get on disability, even when you're severely disabled. I follow a lot of disabled people on TikTok, for example, people who are in wheelchairs, who are in motorized wheelchairs, who have to still prove to the government that they are disabled. You need doctor's visits, exams documented thoroughly and accurately. Then you need to wait months or even years to usually get denied the first try. When I first moved to the state I live in currently, I lived in a very difficult situation where working was genuinely harder for me because of a multitude of reasons. We had one car and I couldn't drive, and we lived in a very small town. And we asked my new doctor about getting onto disability. This is a doctor that hadn't known me very long, but knew of my conditions, one of them being the lung collapse earlier that year. He refused to help me get on disability because he didn't want me to just give up trying. I literally couldn't work at the time unless I had the exact same hours as my mom in the same establishment she worked in that I simply did not want to work at, and she didn't want me working at either. In general, the doctors in that area sucked and didn't understand the situation I lived in, but that's neither here nor there. Disability would be a genuine possibility for me now if I lived in, like, Canada. But the US is so inherently ableist that I just simply don't have a choice anymore. It's not even that I don't want to work, it's entirely that I can't in this society. I can work a register, just let me sit. I can clean an area, just let me sit down. As I've been working on this script, the Trump administration has announced their new, unfounded takes on autism. The same administration has also put restrictions on who can get the COVID vaccine. On top of that, the administration is also seeking to remove vaccine requirements from schools, despite the fact that we have now lost herd immunity to most things because people are too afraid of being microchipped, complaining about it on Facebook on their smartphones, or afraid of getting autism, a condition that, if they were diagnosed with at this point, wouldn't even affect their daily lives that much. And if their kids were to develop it, they would immediately begin to baby them no matter how their autism presented. Food stamps will soon not be able to cover sodas and candy because why should poor people have nice things? What's so wrong with your tax dollars, which in all isn't actually that much of your tax dollars considering how many other people contribute their tax dollars as well, going towards a guy like me who really loves cream soda Dr. Pepper? The cost of living rises every day, and even the average abled person needs to work multiple jobs to afford rent. They won't raise the minimum wage because the idea of a McDonald's worker getting paid a living wage is literally laughable to some people. Suddenly, we have jobs that are only starter jobs for high schoolers and therefore shouldn't pay the older people working there enough to live. Every day in the US, disabled people are put in more peril, while the right's main concern is that people who don't deserve benefits are getting them. They take no time to research the things that they complain about and take word only from the famous people they blindly follow. Almost every other first world country has universal healthcare, while in the US, dental is considered vanity and not covered on most healthcares. The state I live in didn't opt into the Affordable Care Act until the pandemic. I should note it was voted into being before the pandemic. It was voted in 2018. It just, So the first few years I lived here, I actually couldn't get decent healthcare to begin with and often had to pay out of pocket for my pain management medication. I have a nephew who needs to see doctors for mental health and arthritis, but because my brother, his dad, makes too much, which is also barely enough for them to get by, he's not eligible for Medicaid. They have been fighting for over a year now to get him on some sort of healthcare program because my brother simply can't afford to get him healthcare, but makes too much for Medicaid. I didn't I didn't necessarily intend to get political here at the end. It's hard to not bring up current politics when it dictates how you're allowed to live your life. I only have chronic pain that needs to be taken care of, and yet all the factors I brought up just now affect me personally. Imagine how much it affects people who are more disabled than me. People whose only choices are to live on the disability benefits that prevent them from saving more than $2,000. A price that in some places is the minimum rent and utilities price. I'm not sure how I want to end this video, I guess. I wasn't even sure how to write the script. I just kind of let myself go wild writing it and complaining. I guess I'll just end with believe disabled people, help them, speak out for them when no one will listen to them. This is just a lot of stuff that's been building up over the last decade, and believe me when I tell you I still have stuff I didn't mention, but it's just not worth adding in anywhere here. I don't think I will make another rant video like this. This is definitely out of the norm for what I want to do with this channel. If you've watched this far, hello. I'm primarily an art channel with some gaming. I'm no activist or political person. I'm just a disabled guy who likes to play and draw. I made a crochet squid while wearing 2 different Sonic t-shirts in this video. That's more of what I'm about than what the past 20 minutes I've been speaking is. If you're interested in my actual content, do check it out. I don't have much in terms of videos, but if you look at my VODs playlist, you can see what I'm more focused on. My next video is probably going to be another peak one or an art one. We'll see which one I edit first. Thank you for watching. Have a great day. Hopefully we'll make it out of this nightmare together. Here is me sewing up the squid and then adding eyes. This is the first time I ever put eyes on one of these squids. So you get to see me figuring that part out.